What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses comes face to face with a host who refuses to back down from the most uncomfortable questions? You won't believe what unfolds when Sandra Bullock sits down for what should have been a simple promotional appearance, only to find herself trapped in an interrogation that spirals completely out of control. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a full-scale confrontation that left audiences stunned and the entertainment industry questioning everything they thought they knew about late-night television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation as Sandra Bullock made her entrance, waving graciously to the crowd that erupted in applause. She looked radiant in a sleek black dress, her trademark smile lighting up the stage as she settled into the guest chair. The atmosphere seemed perfect, a beloved actress promoting her latest project, ready to charm viewers with her wit and relatability that had made her a household name for decades. But something felt different from the moment Jimmy Kimmel walked onto the stage. His usual jovial demeanor carried an edge that veteran viewers might have noticed. The way he shuffled his cue cards, the slightly forced nature of his opening monologue, and the particular gleam in his eyes suggested this wouldn't be the lighthearted conversation audiences expected. "Sandra Bullock, everybody," Jimmy announced as the applause died down. "Thank you for being here. I have to say, it's been quite a year for you, hasn't it?" Sandra's smile remained warm but cautious. "It has been eventful, Jimmy. Thank you for having me." "Eventful is one way to put it," Jimmy replied, his tone carrying an undercurrent that made Sandra's posture shift slightly. "I mean, we've got your new movie, which we'll talk about, but I think what everyone's really curious about is some of the other headlines you've been making lately." The audience murmured with anticipation. Sandra's publicist, sitting in the front row, leaned forward slightly, her expression growing tense. This wasn't what they had discussed in the pre-interview. "Well, I'm here to talk about the film, Jimmy. It's a really exciting project that I'm passionate about," Sandra responded diplomatically, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Jimmy wasn't having it. He leaned back in his chair with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, we'll get to that. But first, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. The adoption controversy that's been swirling around you. Some pretty serious allegations about the process, about potential irregularities. Care to comment on that?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Sandra's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, but the damage was done. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, fell silent. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Jimmy," Sandra replied carefully. "My family is off limits, as we discussed. I'm here to promote my work, not to discuss my personal life or address baseless rumors." Jimmy's laugh was sharp and artificial. "Baseless? Really? Because I've got some pretty credible sources here that suggest otherwise. Sources that say there were some questionable payments made, some strings pulled that maybe shouldn't have been pulled. That's not baseless. That's investigative journalism." The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the entertainment they had come for. Sandra's hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles beginning to whiten. "Jimmy, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I won't sit here and let you attack my family," Sandra said, her voice remaining steady but with a steel underneath that hadn't been there moments before. "Attack? I'm just asking questions that the public deserves answers to. You're a public figure, Sandra. You put yourself out there, you profit from your image, and when there are questions about your conduct, don't you think people have a right to know?" "There are no questions about my conduct," Sandra shot back, her composure beginning to crack. "There are manufactured controversies created by people with agendas, and apparently you've decided to become part of that machine." Jimmy leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "So you're saying these adoption agencies that are under investigation, the ones that facilitated your adoptions, that there's nothing there? That it's all just a coincidence?" The audience was now completely silent, watching this train wreck unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. Sandra's publicist was frantically trying to catch the producer's attention, making cutting motions across her throat. "My children came to me through legitimate, legal channels, Jimmy. The fact that you're even asking these questions shows exactly who you are as a person, and it's not someone I want to continue this conversation with." Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for doing my job. Jimmy's voice rose slightly. For asking the tough questions that other people are too afraid to ask? This is exactly the kind of deflection we've come to expect from Hollywood elite when they get caught. Caught doing what exactly? Sandra's voice was now sharp as a blade. Being a mother? Giving children a loving home? If that's a crime, then I'm guilty as charged. The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators were getting close-ups of both participants, sensing that this was television gold, even if it was uncomfortable gold. The audience seemed frozen, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or simply watch in stunned silence. Jimmy consulted his cue cards with theatrical precision. Let's talk about the money trail, Sandra. The donations to certain politicians, the connections to adoption agencies, the timing of your adoptions coinciding with your biggest movie successes. Are you telling me that's all just a coincidence? Sandra stood up slightly in her chair, her entire demeanor changing. I'm telling you that you're a disgrace to this profession, Jimmy. You've ambushed me on your show, attacked my family, and now you're essentially accusing me of corruption. Based on what? Gossip? Tabloid speculation? I'm accusing you of using your wealth and influence to circumvent normal adoption procedures while other families wait years for the same opportunity. That's not gossip, that's accountability. The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, some calling out in support of Sandra, others seemingly riveted by the drama unfolding before them. But Jimmy pressed on, clearly feeling he had the upper hand. And let's not forget about the charity work, he continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. All those photo opportunities in disaster zones, all that perfectly timed publicity. Tell me, Sandra, how much of that money actually reaches the people who need it versus how much goes to administrative costs and publicity campaigns? Sandra's face flushed with anger. Are you serious right now? You're questioning my humanitarian work? Work that I've done quietly for years before anyone even knew about it. Quietly, with camera crews documenting every moment? Come on, Sandra. At least be honest about what this is, a carefully orchestrated image campaign designed to make you look like America's sweetheart while you operate behind the scenes like everyone else in this town. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, with both participants now visibly agitated. Sandra's publicist was now standing, desperately trying to signal for a commercial break, but the cameras kept rolling. This was exactly the kind of must-see television that would have people talking for weeks. But as heated as things had become, this was just the beginning of what would prove to be one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history, and Jimmy Kimmel was just getting started. What happened next would forever change how audiences viewed both celebrities involved, as Jimmy decided to cross every line of professional decency, while Sandra Bullock fought back with a ferocity that nobody saw coming. The gloves were about to come off completely, and what you're about to witness is the exact moment when a talk show appearance transformed into an all-out war. Jimmy shuffled through his cue cards with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. Like a predator circling wounded prey. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as Sandra sat rigidly in her chair, her jaw clenched so tightly that viewers could see the muscles working beneath her skin. The audience had gone from uncomfortable, murmuring to dead silence, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. You know what really gets me, Sandra? Jimmy said, his voice taking on a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than his earlier aggression. It's the hypocrisy. You build this entire brand around being the down-to-earth, relatable actress, the one who's different from all the other Hollywood phonies. But behind the scenes, you're playing the same games as everyone else, just with better PR. Sandra's eyes narrowed dangerously. You don't know anything about me, Jimmy. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've given up, or what I've endured to get where I am. All you know is what you read in tabloids and what your research team feeds you. Oh, I know more than you think, Jimmy replied, pulling out a sheet of paper with theatrical flourish. I know about the NDAs. Dozens of them. Staff members, assistants, even family members of your adopted children. Why so many non-disclosure agreements, Sandra? What exactly are you trying to hide? The accusation hit Sandra like a physical blow. She gripped the armrests of her chair even tighter, her knuckles now completely white. Those agreements protect my children's privacy, you absolute monster. They protect my family from people exactly like you who would exploit them for ratings. Monster? Really? Jimmy's laugh was cold and calculating. I'm not the one silencing people who might have something to say about your conduct. I'm not the one using legal intimidation to keep inconvenient truths from coming to light. Inconvenient truths. Sandra's voice rose for the first time, cracking slightly with emotion. You mean protecting my kids from having their personal information spread across the internet by tabloid vultures? You mean making sure their birth families aren't harassed by photographers and reporters? That's what you call silencing people. But Jimmy was relentless, sensing that he had found Sandra's breaking point. Let's talk about those birth families, shall we? Specifically, let's talk about the Ethiopian government officials who were arrested last year for their involvement in illegal adoption schemes. The same officials who processed your adoption paperwork. Coincidence? Sandra shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward with the force of her movement. How dare you? How dare you sit there and imply that my children's adoptions were anything other than completely legitimate? You're attacking innocent children, Jimmy. My children. The audience began to react audibly now, some gasping, others calling out in support of Sandra. But Jimmy remained seated, calm and collected, clearly enjoying the chaos he had created. I'm not attacking your children, Sandra. I'm questioning the system that brought them to you and whether your wealth and status gave you advantages that other families didn't have. That's called journalism. That's called character assassination. Sandra shouted, her composure completely shattered now. You've taken rumors and speculation and presented them as facts. You've ambushed me on your show with allegations that have no basis in reality. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk playing across his features. A hit job? Sandra, I'm simply asking questions that your publicists and lawyers have managed to keep most other journalists from asking. Questions about the timeline of your adoptions, the expedited processing, the unusual circumstances surrounding the approvals. Unusual circumstances? Sandra's voice was shaking with rage now. You mean the fact that I was thoroughly vetted, that I went through years of home studies and background checks, that I proved I could provide a loving, stable home for children who needed one? Those unusual circumstances. I mean the fact that your applications were processed in record time while other families waited years. I mean the fact that certain fees were paid that other families weren't asked to pay. I mean, the fact that you had direct access to government officials that other adoptive parents could only dream of. The studio audience was now completely divided, with some people shouting support for Sandra while others seemed fascinated by Jimmy's relentless pursuit. Camera operators were capturing every moment, every expression, every gesture of this unprecedented confrontation. Sandra began pacing behind her chair, her hands clenched into fists. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. No idea about the process, the requirements, the emotional and financial investment involved. You're throwing around accusations without understanding the first thing about international adoption. Then educate me, Jimmy challenged, spreading his arms wide. Explain to me why your adoptions happened so quickly. Explain the additional payments. Explain why officials who were later arrested for corruption were the ones who handled your cases. I don't owe you any explanations. Sandra exploded. I don't owe you or anyone else details about my private family matters. The fact that you think you're entitled to that information shows exactly what kind of person you are. Jimmy's expression hardened. The kind of person who asks tough questions? The kind of person who doesn't give celebrities a pass just because they're popular? You're right, Sandra. That is exactly the kind of person I am. No, Jimmy. You're the kind of person who destroys families for entertainment. You're the kind of person who takes the most precious thing in someone's life, their children, and uses it as ammunition for your pathetic ratings grab. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both participants now completely abandoning any pretense of civility. The audience was in chaos, some people standing, others shouting, all of them witnessing what was clearly television history in the making. Jimmy stood up from his desk for the first time, his own composure beginning to crack. You know what your problem is, Sandra? You think being popular makes you untouchable. You think your image as America's sweetheart gives you immunity from scrutiny. But it doesn't. Nobody is above accountability. Accountability? Sandra's voice was now hoarse from shouting. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about your accountability, Jimmy. Let's talk about your responsibility as a host to treat your guests with basic human decency. Let's talk about your duty to separate fact from fiction instead of trafficking in gossip and innuendo. The studio was electric with tension, every person in the audience hanging on every word. This had gone far beyond entertainment. This was a battle for the very soul of late-night television, and nobody knew where it would end. What came next would push this confrontation into territory that no one could have predicted. As Sandra Bullock prepared to launch a counterattack that would leave Jimmy Kimmel reeling and the audience stunned into absolute silence. The moment that followed would be replayed millions of times across social media, analyzed by entertainment journalists, and remembered as the exact instant when Sandra Bullock transformed from Hollywood's sweetheart into a warrior defending her family with everything she had. What you're about to witness is the complete destruction of Jimmy Kimmel's credibility, delivered with surgical precision by an actress who had finally reached her breaking point. Sandra stopped pacing and turned to face Jimmy directly, her entire demeanor shifting from defensive to predatory in a heartbeat. The studio lights seemed to focus on her as she took a step closer to his desk, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that somehow carried more menace than all her previous shouting. You want to talk about accountability, Jimmy? Let's talk about yours, Sandra said, her words cutting through the studio atmosphere like a blade. Let's talk about your gambling addiction that you've managed to keep out of the press. Let's talk about the show's budget that's been mysteriously inflated to cover your losses in Vegas. Jimmy's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of genuine shock and panic. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Oh, but I think you do, Sandra continued, her confidence growing as she watched Jimmy's composure crumble. You see, Jimmy, when you decide to come after someone's family, you better make sure your own house is in order. And your house? It's built on a foundation of lies and covered debts. The audience was now completely silent, sensing that the tables had turned in the most dramatic way possible. Jimmy's face had gone pale, and he was gripping his cue cards so tightly they were beginning to crumple. Let's talk about the real reason you're doing this tonight, Sandra pressed on, moving even closer to his desk. This isn't about journalism or accountability. This is about distraction. This is about keeping people focused on manufactured controversies, instead of looking at the very real financial improprieties happening right here on this show. You're making this up, Jimmy said weakly, but his voice was shaking now, and everyone in the studio could hear it. Am I? Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Because I have bank records here, Jimmy. Records that show a pattern of withdrawals from show accounts that coincide perfectly with your known gambling trips. Records that show payments to casino executives that were listed as production expenses. Jimmy's eyes widened in horror as he stared at the paper in Sandra's hand. Where did you get that? The same place you got your information about my family, Jimmy. Sources. People who are tired of watching you abuse your position while destroying other people's lives for your own twisted entertainment. The studio audience was now buzzing with excitement, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Camera operators were zooming in on Jimmy's face, capturing every moment of his growing panic. Sandra held up the paper, her voice growing stronger with each word. This document shows that you've stolen over $2 million from this show's budget to cover your gambling debts. Money that should have gone to crew salaries, charitable donations, and production costs. Money that you've systematically embezzled to fund your addiction. That's completely false, Jimmy protested, but his voice was barely a whisper now. Is it? Because I also have testimony from 3 different casino managers who are willing to go on record about your behavior. About the threats you've made when you couldn't pay your debts. About the promises you made to use your show to destroy people who crossed you. Jimmy tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out from under him, and he collapsed back into his chair. The audience was now in complete chaos, with people shouting and some even standing on their chairs to get a better view of the carnage. You want to know what real corruption looks like, Jimmy? Sandra's voice was now booming through the studio. It's using your platform to attack innocent people while you're stealing from your own employees. It's threatening your guests when they won't play along with your twisted games. It's turning what should be entertainment into a weapon of personal destruction. Stop, Jimmy whispered, but Sandra was just getting started. Oh, we're not done yet, she said, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. Let's talk about the NDAs that you've forced your staff to sign. Not to protect their privacy, but to keep them from reporting your abusive behavior. Let's talk about the assistants who've quit because of your harassment. Let's talk about the writers who've been fired for refusing to help you ambush guests. Jimmy's face was now completely ashen, and sweat was beading on his forehead. Please, Sandra. My family. Your family. Sandra's laugh was sharp and bitter. Now you're concerned about family? Where was that concern when you were attacking my children on national television? Where was that concern when you were spreading lies about their adoption? The studio audience was now completely out of control, with some people cheering for Sandra while others sat in stunned silence. The camera operators were capturing every moment, knowing they were documenting the complete destruction of a television career. Sandra moved to stand directly in front of Jimmy's desk, towering over him as he cowered in his chair. You are a pathetic excuse for a human being, Jimmy Kimmel. You're a bully who preys on people's vulnerabilities while hiding your own shameful secrets. You're a thief who steals from his own show while pretending to be a champion of justice. I'm sorry, Jimmy whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos in the studio. You're sorry. Sandra's voice rose to a crescendo. You're sorry for attacking my family? You're sorry for spreading lies about my children? You're sorry for using your platform to destroy people's lives while you're stealing from your own employees? Jimmy could only nod weakly, looking like a broken man. Your apology means nothing to me, Sandra said, her voice dripping with contempt. Nothing you can say will undo the damage you've done tonight. Nothing you can say will take back the lies you've told about my family. She turned to address the audience directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the studio. This is what happens when you give power to people who don't deserve it. This is what happens when you let bullies hide behind the pretense of entertainment. This is what happens when you allow corruption to flourish in plain sight. The audience erupted in applause, many people standing and cheering for Sandra's devastating takedown of their host. Jimmy sat motionless in his chair, staring at his hands, completely defeated. Sandra walked back to her chair, picked up her purse, and looked directly into the camera. To everyone watching at home, this is who Jimmy Kimmel really is. A corrupt, abusive bully who attacks families while stealing from his own show. Don't let him fool you anymore. She turned back to Jimmy one final time, her voice quiet, but carrying absolute finality. I hope it was worth it, Jimmy. I hope destroying your career and your reputation was worth attacking my children. With that, Sandra Bullock walked off the stage, her heels clicking against the floor in the stunned silence that followed. The audience was frozen, unsure whether to applaud or simply sit in shock at what they had just witnessed. Jimmy remained slumped in his chair, the papers scattered on his desk, his career in ruins. The cameras continued to roll, capturing the complete destruction of what had once been one of late-night television's biggest stars. As Sandra disappeared through the backstage curtains, the studio audience finally found their voice, erupting in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. They had witnessed something extraordinary, the complete and total destruction of a television bully by the woman he had tried to destroy. The confrontation was over, but the consequences would reverberate through Hollywood for months to come. Jimmy Kimmel's reputation was in tatters, his show's ratings would plummet, and Sandra Bullock had proven that even America's sweetheart could be a fierce protector when her family was threatened. What started as an ambush had ended with Jimmy Kimmel's complete humiliation, and Sandra Bullock walking away with her dignity intact and her reputation stronger than ever. The audience would never forget what they had witnessed, and neither would the millions of viewers who would watch the footage online in the days that followed. This was the night that Jimmy Kimmel learned that some people should never be underestimated, and that attacking someone's family comes with consequences that can destroy everything you've worked to build.